Hello. So, I have been reading Plato's Theaetetus earlier, and I'm going to specify with the intro from Miles Burnett, but I haven't actually read the intro because it's thicker than the actual dialogue. So I haven't read that, and haven't read the whole of the Theaetetus because it's not necessarily a big book. I reckon it's about 100 pages all in all, maybe a little bit more than that, but it is quite deep. It's quite in depth. It requires slow reading. It requires careful consideration as to what the meaning may be. But I think I'm getting somewhere. So basically, it's a dialogue between Socrates and Theaetetus, and then there's a couple of other characters in it as well. So there is Theodorus, which is sort of Socrates' friend. And he's also, I believe, a geometry teacher, and he teaches Theaetetus, who is this extremely smart pupil. So at the start of the Theaetetus, Socrates asks if there's any students who stand out to him and who might be worthy of his questioning. It's something along those lines, anyway. And Theodorus suggests that there's a boy who's he's extremely intelligent, he's got a good character. He specifies that it's good that he's ugly because people would think that perhaps he fancied him. And yeah, he puts forward this name of Theaetetus. It turns out Socrates is familiar with the boy and is familiar with the boy's father. So eventually Theodorus invites Theaetetus over. Him and Socrates start to have the dialogue surrounding mostly the question of what is knowledge. And that's essentially what the Theaetetus is about. So Theaetetus gives a definition to knowledge initially, saying that knowledge is, and then proceeds to list varying examples as to different disciplines which use knowledge. So I think he lists a cobblesmith and a geometer. And both of these people or disciplines certainly have knowledge. They use knowledge, which they then apply to their specific discipline. But then Socrates says, well, I asked for a simple or a frank definition, and you have given me variety. And Theodorus is initially a bit perplexed by this, because it's well, he's a smart guy. It's oh, okay, well, I thought I was right. But anyway, he's, after a bit of prompting from Socrates and perhaps an explanation or questioning which sort of reveals the falsity in his initial definition, or perhaps not the falsity because there's definitely truth there, it's not exactly a substantial definition. So after figuring that out, Socrates asked Theaetetus to provide another definition of knowledge. So this time, Theaetetus says knowledge is perception. And so by this we can derive that knowledge is that which we can perceive through our senses. And that in itself also has some problems according to Socrates. Because it assumes that we can't necessarily know the world in and of itself. We can only know our perspective of things. And if that's the case, then we could go as far to say that the external world doesn't actually exist because there's nothing to know. And, well, that's not necessarily a good explanation, I don't think. There's an example in the book as well. I can't remember exactly who poses it, but it's obviously Socrates who poses it, but he takes inspiration from another philosopher who says that man is the maker of all things, or man is the understander of all things, or something along those lines. And that basically means man is the centre of the universe, the determiner of truth. But then what about animals' perspectives on the world? Are those incomplete? Are those not true? Because animals have a completely different perception of the world. They have a different knowledge of the same thing. So for example, bats perceive the world through the means of echolocation. Humans perceive the world predominantly through the five senses. Snakes and eagles can perceive the world with different varying degrees of light that we're unable to detect. So all of these different varying perspectives of the same world almost discount the idea that knowledge can be derived or is just purely perspective or perception, because perception in some way must be incomplete, because all of these different views of the world, of the same world, can't be true because they're contradictory. We can't say they're both is and is not light, because we would obviously say that there isn't an infrared light based on our own perception using our eyes because we can't see it. But the snake, if the snake could talk, would say that this does exist. So then we're left with, okay, well, whose perception do we trust? Do we trust the humans, which is rather anthrocentric or human-centric? Or do we say, well, actually, maybe knowledge is derived from somewhere other than perception? And I think that's as far as I've got in the book so far. It's basically, but I know there's one more definition of knowledge that is given, and I remember actually it's right belief. So knowledge is correct belief about the world, and then in order to be able to determine this definition as being true or false, we have to determine whether or not we can have false belief. Would we? And can we have false beliefs? Well, of course we can have false beliefs. I could say, I believe the bottle is not on the table when clearly the bottle is on the table. Right, so that's a false belief. So true belief would be, no, because we still know that. Is it? Do we know that? But then that would be knowledge based on perception, because I'm determining the bottle being on the table as true belief by looking at it and perceiving it as being on the table. Sorry, I paused it because I thought my flatmate was coming in, and that would have been awkward if I was just sat here filming myself talking about Theaetetus. Okay, so knowledge as true belief. So, well, let's look at knowledge as true belief. I believe the bottle is on the table. Okay, but then I guess the problem is determining how we get to the belief. And how we get to the belief maybe through perception, right? So I believe the bottle is on the table is a belief. I don't know. I haven't looked into this one enough to be able to know it. No. Okay, anyway, I'm just going to gloss over that one for now, and I'll think about it more in depth at a later time. But basically, what the point of the Theaetetus is, debatably, is... Okay, I had to move because my flatmate actually did come into the room, so I didn't want to keep on talking. Yeah. So the Theaetetus, I think, sort of outlines a way of practicing philosophy. You know, it's about asking questions about the things we think we know in a pursuit for truth. And it also outlines that we may not always be able to find the truth. But just because Socrates and Theaetetus couldn't find the truth, they didn't posit a truth. They didn't posit a false truth as being true. Okay, and if it was a false truth, I guess it wouldn't be a truth at all. But they didn't display something as false and saying, this is the answer, this is true. Which is interesting. Yeah, so the question on what is knowledge is very interesting. Because I feel like this has been studied, you know, throughout history in different ways. So all of the different philosophical disciplines are assuming that they know how to get to truth. Like, it doesn't make sense to say that they're pursuing something in the hopes that they're going to find a false answer. That logically doesn't make any sense whatsoever. So, phenomenology is a body of philosophy which hopes to find truth. Epistemology also hopes to find truth in its study of knowledge and ways of looking at knowledge, and tries to derive truthful conclusions about how we know things and what we know. Phenomenology is, I guess, about perception. It's about experience. It's about the way we experience the world as humans and how our minds determine that in some ways. And is that in some ways a way of pursuing truth? I guess so. Yeah. So that's it really. That's all I've got to say. So thank you for watching.